Okay. Welcome, everybody, to Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor's Tuesday evening chat with two rabbis. We have as our guests tonight Rabbi Zvi Kahn, Orthodox rabbi and educator, and our Rabbi Barry Silver of Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor, our progressive rabbi. And it is Tuesday evening, May the 4th. May the 4th be with you, and take it away, gentlemen.
Very good. I love that play on words. And may we move forth into the future with Judaism. It's great to have Rabbi Khan, and it's great to have all of you. We have a wonderful passage to discuss B'Har. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the tragedy that happened in Israel recently with Rabbi Khan. As we usually do, I asked Rabbi Khan to begin the discussion of the Torah reading for this Friday night. Rabbi Khan, take it away.
Thank you so much. Great to be here, as always. This week we actually have a double Torah portion of B'Har and B'Chukotai, and one of the big topics is what's called in Hebrew Shemitah, the Shemitah year or the sabbatical year, and it's really quite interesting. And the basic concept was that there was a 7-year cycle in the land of Israel, and in the 7th year, there were no agricultural what's the right word? Activities. In other words, you couldn't plow your land, you couldn't harvest your land. Instead of that, every landowner would say, whatever I have is available for people to eat. Whoever wants to come eat my apples, my oranges, my grapes, my figs, my dates, my pears, whatever fruit a person had, he or she would make available to other people to come in and take, instead of selling them, instead of doing business with them. And also for animals could come into the fields, and you had to allow them to come eat their fill of your produce. So it's really an amazing concept. It's a kind of pulling back of our control and saying, God, everything belongs to you. And once in 7 years, we're going to prove that, we're going to demonstrate that by allowing people to just come in and eat of our produce, and we're going to share our bounty with other people. So not only was it a kind of theological and philosophical accomplishment for people to do this, but it was a great act of kindness. Imagine nowadays if the farmers all over the United States said, once every 7 years, we're going to give away all of our produce for free, and we're going to give away everything that we grow on our farms to people for free. It would certainly be like a paradise for poor people and indigent people, because they could take the benefit of all of this produce that was being given out for free. You literally were not allowed to sell your produce or do business or commercial activities with your produce. Now, in addition to that, as if that wasn't enough, in addition to that, any loans that you had made to people were suspended in the 7th year, in the Shemitah year. So people who owed you money, obviously you would normally make it your business to collect the loan before the Shemitah year, before the 7th year in the cycle. But if you did not do so, then the loan was suspended. Which is also an incredible benefit to people who couldn't afford to pay back, and indigent people. In a way, it kind of fits really nicely with the things that are happening in our country right now with the political plans, with the Biden administration plans, in terms of trying to help people who really need the help the most. Well, the Shemitah year, a long time ago, 3,500 years ago, this idea was incredibly progressive and advanced to be able to say, let's make it so that the people who really need help can be helped in terms of produce and food, but also in terms of money and loans and financial support. So I've always thought this was an incredibly advanced and beautiful idea that the Torah teaches in this week's Torah portion.
Yeah, sounds like communism to me, wouldn't you say, Rabbi Khan?
once every 7 years, it's not such a bad thing.
Actually, the Torah also says elsewhere in Leviticus that you should do that all the time. When you have a farm or a vineyard, you should let certain crops lie and not pick them up. So throughout the year, all the time, you do this. But on that year, the 7th year, you don't plan anything, no activity, like you say. It's really very far advanced, and that's why it seems to me just so bizarre that Jewish people would line up with the conservative or the Republican side, where they're saying, well, if I have it, this is mine, and you guys are communists, and you guys are socialists, and you guys are this. Judaism is big time communist, socialist, communal, giving things away. I mean, if you want to figure out like where do Jews line up according to the Torah, there's no doubt which side of the political spectrum they're on when it comes to things like this. This is a revolutionary, radical type of act. It's even more than communism. It's people come onto your land and have their free reign of your food. I was wondering, Rabbi Khan, what is the Orthodox explanation for why this is no longer done? Because obviously, I don't think most Orthodox people just let people come onto their land and take what they need. So how do they explain that this practice is no longer done?
You remember last week we talked about when the when the
same
temple,
thing, right? Same thing. Because the temple's not in existence.
Once the temple was destroyed about 2,000 years ago, the commandments to treat the land in this way, many of the laws that applied to the land and agricultural laws went into abeyance. But God willing, when we build the third temple at some future point, then it'll come right back into effect. And I look forward to being able to just kind of walk around and pick fruit from different people's fields. But I don't know, I can't say for sure when that's going to happen.
Well, wait just one cotton picking minute. I don't know if everybody's going to agree with that, but I think that would be interesting. The other thing I like about the concept is that it says that you don't own the land. Most people think, hey, I own the land, it's mine, I'll do what I want with it. It says you don't own the land. God owns the land. You're like a tenant on the land, and because of that, you're responsible to use it to help other people, because it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to a higher purpose. You can make a living from it, but you also have to provide for other people. The other thing that's in this passage, which is amazing, which I'll be talking about Friday night, I'm going to shoot the video pretty soon, is it says, and you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Those words from this passage show up on the Liberty Bell. Yeah. So that's why I like to say, and I didn't make this up, others did, that freedom speaks with a Hebrew accent. It's a very beautiful passage here that we have. Rabbi Khan, you want to share a little bit about, or does anybody have any questions or comments about that? And then we can go on to the other thing. Go ahead, Sharon.
So is what we're talking about, the sabbatical year, is this in the B'Chukotai or in B'Har?
B'Har. Oh,
So
something else I wanted to mention. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, is there anything, well, I'm sure there's many significant things, but is there a significant particular thing that we want to talk about? B'Chukotai?
Rabbi Khan, did you want to mention anything about B'Chukotai? Actually, there's something else I want to mention about B'Har, but go ahead. Did you want to mention something about B'Chukotai?
Just to mention something very interesting, I think, from the second of the two Torah portions that we read. And the second one, Sharon, as you mentioned, is B'Chukotai. So that word itself means in your statutes or in your laws. And the sentence says, if in my laws you walk and you conduct yourself within your laws, within my laws and within my statutes, then you will be rewarded and you will be blessed. And if not, if you reject my laws and my statutes, then then it won't be so good. And that's a theme really that we see throughout the Torah, repeated in many different ways and many different times. That the idea of God saying, there's a mission for the Jewish people. The Jewish people are unique in the sense that they have a mission. They have a special mission. And the mission, as we've talked about before, is teaching people about the existence of God and monotheism and one God, and also the idea of conducting ourselves in certain ways and carrying out what we believe to be God's commandments. And if the Jewish people follow in that mission, then this idea is that there will be rewards for that and good consequences for that. But if not, if the Jewish people reject that mission, then the consequences will not be good. And that is clearly stated in B'Chukotai, in that second Torah portion.
Yeah, Rabbi Khan, you have a gift for understatement. I just want to say that when Rabbi Khan says it won't be so good, it says that I will thus have grown tired of you. I will let your cities fall into ruin, make your sanctuaries desolate. No longer will I accept the appealing fragrance of your sacrifices. I will make the land so desolate that even your enemies who live there will be astonished. I will scatter you among the nations and keep the sword drawn against you. Your land will remain desolate and your cities in ruins. And then as long as the land is desolate and you are in your enemy's land, the land will enjoy its Sabbath. So once you're out, the land's going to return to be productive. But as long as you're there and you disobey me, it's like really horrendous things that happen. But then afterwards it says, but you will return, then everything will be happily ever after. Go ahead, Emily.
Well, you know what you just said about the land not belonging to a person, but being part of God's possession, whatever you want to call it. Very similar to the Native American feeling, right, that, you know, it belongs to nature. Then, and this is going to really get everybody upset, then how do you justify the Orthodox Jewry in Israel for saying this land is ours, it's not yours?
But it's not just, I mean, I'm happy to discuss that, but that's not just an Orthodox perspective. That's a Zionist perspective. And
Zionist perspective.
Yeah, the Zionist movement wasn't founded particularly by Orthodox Jews, but that's the idea of Zionism, is that the Jewish people have a unique and special connection to the land of Israel. And, you know, why we feel that way is based on so many different things. It's based on our religious traditions. It's based on our history. It's based on the fact that there have always been Jewish people living in the land of Israel, and no other people can make that claim as far back into antiquity as the fact that Jews have always lived there. But again, I think that that's an idea. I'm certainly would never say that all Jews believe that, but that's an idea that's deeply rooted in the Jewish people as a whole. I think not just an Orthodox idea.
Right.
But I think
go ahead.
I think there is a way to reconcile the two things, because, like Rabbi Khan says, the Jewish people have historical, cultural, religious ties to the land, and so the Jewish people have the right, we believe, to be in Israel and to have it as a Jewish state. But I think even those who say this is our land, from a Jewish perspective, what they mean is this is the land that God provided for us to use for a holy purpose. Israel is not just like any other country where Jews live there and this is our land. We have an obligation to create a state that's going to be a paragon of virtue and bring blessings to humanity. And we should use that state not just to bring benefits to us, but for the benefit of humanity. So I think you're right, Emily. Technically, even Israel shouldn't be considered our land. It's holy land, it's God's land, and we use it for higher purpose. I agree with your interpretation of that. Joel, go ahead.
It's kind of interesting on a standpoint of the 7 years you rest the land. In the science of conserving the land, you do set aside parcels of the land that you don't plant, you rotate. It's called rotating the crops. You've heard that term. It's interesting that it's in the Bible, and it's interesting that it's in a science, form of science carried forward. What else is in, from a I'm off track here a little bit, I know, but I'll ask Rabbi Khan, what else is in the Torah that stipulates this type of thing? Is there anything else?
You mean any other types of laws or things mentioned that coincide with science? Is that
right, on that basis? Because this is definitely something that has been picked up, whether it was picked up from there or wherever it evolved. It became what we talk about: rotating the crops, resting the land, conservation is the big thing.
Well, I think there are some examples that, in a broad sense, really fit very nicely. Not necessarily in all the details and specifics, but in a broad sense, fit beautifully with modern understandings of science and medicine. And I'll give you some examples. The Torah specifies that marrying close relatives is taboo, is strictly forbidden, and goes into great length about that. However, that was practiced by ancient cultures. Incest, even brothers marrying sisters and things like that, was seen as normal and okay in some ancient societies. And so that to me is a very early example of the Torah of the
hemophilia. Hemophilia is
exactly
derivative of that.
Yeah, don't do this. And then people who ignored that idea and practiced incest and other things like that, or very close marriages within close relatives, suffered all kinds of terrible consequences and things like that. And so I think that's an example. There's a tremendous emphasis throughout the Torah, different parts of the Torah, on washing and cleaning and immersing oneself. And there's no doubt, especially during COVID, we all know about it, but there's no doubt that this idea of washing your hands, cleaning yourself, showering, bathing is very healthy. And the Torah, it doesn't necessarily say do this because it's healthy, but it does put an emphasis on it. So I think that there's a lot more examples I could give about that, but I think that's an interesting subject to look at.
The Torah is replete with laws, customs, statutes that modern science now tells us have a therapeutic effect. As Rabbi Khan says, that's not why they did it. They did it because God said so. But probably our ancestors noticed that if you do certain things, it's going to be good, especially even quarantine. If someone has leprous spots, taking a day of rest to contemplate is therapeutic. Taking a time to fast is therapeutic. Like almost everything you do, giving thanks for what you have is mentally therapeutic. I mean, the whole Torah is replete with things that bring health benefits and that are accurate scientifically. It's up to us as rational Jews to try to figure out why they were saying this, and sometimes to realize that some of the things didn't have a good reason, and those things we don't necessarily need to do, but other ones make sense and we should do them. Yeah, Emily.
My kids used to, when they were little, I used to say about how you can't marry your cousins. And the question that they gave was, if Adam and Eve were the only two people on earth and they had, Rabbi Khan knows what I'm going to say, how did they get around no incest? So go ahead.
So that's a really good question. It's so good, in fact, that the Talmud asked that question, like how if all we read about is Cain and Abel, also, how did they have any children, right?
Did they have children with Eve and then go on, hello?
So the Talmud's answer is, it doesn't answer the question about incest, but it does say that each child had a twin sister that was born with him. So Cain, it was Cain and a girl, and there was Abel and a girl, and they were unnamed in the story, but they existed, and each one married the other brother's sister. So it doesn't take care, Emily, of your incest question, but it does help with the question of where were the women?
Where were the women? Right.
Where were the women for these people to marry? Yeah, well, good question.
They just make stuff up as they go along to fill in the blanks. But another question is this. It says that when Cain murdered Abel, they put a mark on him, the mark of Cain.
That's right.
And why was that? So that when he went into the cities, he wouldn't be murdered. So where did the cities come from? That's a bigger question. What cities are there? There are only two people. I mean, the whole thing is completely anachronistic. That's one of many reasons why a lot of Jewish people don't believe that this was infallibly written and that these stories are more mythological than logical. I did want to bring up something about B'Har, which is kind of interesting. In B'Har, in the same time that they have a statement that's on the Statue of Liberty about proclaiming liberty, they also sanction and authorize slavery and go into quite a bit of detail about slavery. And what it says is that if a fellow Jew becomes enslaved, then his relatives have an obligation to redeem him, meaning to pay money necessary to buy him out of servitude. And then it also says that if you own a Jewish slave, and that was because of like an indentured servant, and they have to work it off, it says, don't rob him of his spirit. Treat him like you would an employee. But if it's a non-Jewish slave, there's no slave forever along with his descendants. So slavery is condoned. It's a two-tiered system if it's a Jewish slave or not. And I heard a debate with Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, one of the leading Orthodox rabbis in the world, as far as he's very prolific. He writes books. He's considered a renowned scholar, and he was debating Hitchens. And Hitchens was blasting him and saying terrible things about Judaism and saying this whole chosen people concept is terrible. And Boteach took great offense and said, that's a lie. You don't know anything about Judaism. We were chosen to serve people. We weren't chosen because we're better. We don't treat other people worse than us. But he was lying to Hitchens and to the audience, because this is just one of many indications that Jewish people treated fellow Jews differently than non-Jews. It's all over the Torah. And what's right here is that they actually condone slavery. In other parts, they actually condone selling your daughter into slavery to make ends meet. If you're not doing so well financially, you sell her into slavery. So slavery is recognized. And that's why I say there's certain things in here that are not so helpful or not so beneficial. So we decide that this is something that we're not going to follow. But the slavery that is in the Torah seems to be quite a bit different than what was practiced in the South. There were still certain obligations you had not to completely mistreat people and treat them miserably, but slavery is condoned in B'Har.
Just a comment.
Rabbi Khan, you want to respond to that, and then we can talk about what happened in Israel?
Absolutely. Just a couple of quick comments. One thing is that historically speaking, I believe it's accurate to say that there is nothing that was permitted to the Jewish people in the Torah times, in ancient times, in terms of their treatment of non-Jews, that was not prevalent in terms of the non-Jewish world's treatment of Jews. So in other words, right, in a world in which nations all around the Jews could grab a Jewish person and enslave him, the Jews had the ability to take non-Jews, actually in limited circumstances, not as necessary as a general rule, but in certain circumstances could take and acquire a non-Jewish slave. Now, certainly modern sensibilities reject that, and I think it's important to point out what you just mentioned about comparing it to slavery in the South. It's important to know that under Torah law, it specifically says this in the Torah, if a slave owner hits the slave and causes, let's say, a tooth to fall out, or causes the loss of a limb, or blinds an eye, or different kinds of injuries. In other words, a serious injury, the slave immediately goes free. So the idea was that this person is not your property in the sense that you could kill him or injure him severely. This person was working for you, and it is true, the person was not allowed to go free, and that's the definition of slavery, a person who you're forcing to work for you, who can't go free, who can't choose to just leave and say, I don't want to do this anymore. But there were certainly lots and lots of laws to make it on a much higher level than other kinds of slavery that were practiced at the time. But nonetheless, I readily, I think any fair-minded person has to concede that when we think about slavery nowadays, it's hard for us to understand how that could have been something that was justified at that time. And when we talk about Jewish slavery, I do think that the laws and rules in the Torah itself make it clear that it was much more an indentured servitude, as you mentioned, than slavery, because for a Jew to become a servant of another person, that's only possible in two situations, two circumstances. Either the Jewish person stole something and could not pay back what it was, like you steal something worth $50 of food and you eat the food, but you're so poor, let's say, that you don't have the money to pay back. So then you'd have to work it off until an equivalent amount of work to pay back what you stole. Or I think you also alluded to it, Rabbi Silver, if a person was so destitute that they felt like, I can't even feed myself, so then I can go to another person and say, let me serve you. Let me be like a servant to you, and so I can eat and have a place to live, and so I'm not homeless in a situation like that. Even in that situation, the maximum amount of time would be a 6-year period, which of this kind of servitude. Lots of even with those ideas make it difficult for us to understand. But I do think it's important to look at it in the context of the time and the other rules and laws that are associated with it.
Well, the reason that God gives for saying that you can't enslave another Jew permanently, and they're also released on the Jubilee year, he says, you can't make them a slave to you. They're a slave to me. That's what God says in B'Har. He says, they're my slaves. Like Abraham is called Eved Adonai, which is a servant to God. So these are my slaves, not yours, which I think hopefully we've outgrown that too, to think that we should be a slave to anything or anyone. Today we prize our independence as free thinkers. Let's talk about what happened in Israel. Rabbi Khan, do you want to share some thoughts on that?
Well, obviously the tragedy, you know, is so immense and terrible. And we read today, my wife and my wife just came on. Honey, you want to just wave? There she is. My wife, Sarah Beth, usually tutors at night, but she had a chance tonight, a free night, to be able to get on for a few minutes. So thank you for joining us, honey. We read today a letter that was so heartbreaking, and I can send it to Sharon. I think everyone should read it, of a mother of a boy who was killed, who died. And she just talked about his beautiful, extraordinary qualities. And she feels that he had certain premonitions that he wasn't going to be, you know, he was only 18 years old, but there were strange things that he said and strange things that he started doing. He would come home for lunch, which he didn't usually do, from his school, and he would say, I just want to be with you. You know, I just want to spend more time with the family, because next year, who knows where I'll be. And that was a strange thing for him to say. But what's really important about the letter, I think, is that it helps you see how each of these individuals, I believe it was 45, if I'm not mistaken, 45 people who passed away of all ages, young children. This boy, as I mentioned, was 18 years old. There were elderly people. Each one was a whole life and a whole universe, and in terms of their family and their relatives and their friends, and they were taken away. And it so makes it even more tragic that it was preventable, that it was a stampede, and the arrangements, the necessary safety arrangements to handle the tremendous volume of people who came, were not in place. And that's clear. That's absolutely crystal clear. And the Israeli government is already talking about what to do to make it so much safer for the groups of people that go there. It's just a horrific tragedy. There's nothing, it's terrible to think about.
Yeah, part of the problem is that the Orthodox, some of the ultra-Orthodox are immune from any type of governmental regulation, because they're needed to be part of the government. So they say to the government, this is our religious freedom, don't mess with us. And the government says, okay, do whatever you want. And I think now there's going to be some serious soul searching in Israel about the need to bring everybody under the authority of the government, and everybody needs to comply with safety regulations. It goes the same thing with COVID. We need to have everybody account, but it was such a tragic thing. It's just amazing to me that Israel lives surrounded by so many enemies and so many terrorists, and things are fairly safe in Israel despite all that. And then this tragedy happens. It's just really, like you say, it's really heartbreaking. And Rabbi Khan, I thought you also might want to mention a little bit about what they were doing there and why that place is so sacred. But Harris, go ahead. You wanted to make a comment. You're on mute.
Harris, unmute.
I just want to say that the Palestinians came in and helped everybody in that situation that I'm not sure you're aware of. It was in the Jerusalem Post.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. That's great. We should let people know about that. Yeah, thanks for letting us know.
I also think you should mention that Tara, our daughter, was there. Our daughter was there, and she was amidst the crowd and feeling very trapped, and felt like she wasn't given much direction except to just move, and they didn't know where they were going. At first, they thought it was a bomb. So they thought it was a terrorist attack at first, and they really didn't get much information, and they were just told to move because helicopters were swarming around, and there were ambulances and Hatzalah, and they were just trying to deal with, the chaos and unfortunately those who needed immediate attention. So everyone was just walking as far as they could walk, and there were no buses, all buses and Sheruts, taxis, everything was halted, for at least 5 hours until they started getting all the buses from all over the country to just go from wherever they were. They just sent them to Meron to get them out. And to Israel's credit, I mean, it took a long time. We don't know what happened in the background, but they did get them all out.
Your daughter must have been terrified to be in that environment. Did she know what was going on at the time?
No, she didn't at first. She was in a crowd, and she said that she could see what was going on, but she just saw a whole bunch of people on top of each other, and she didn't really know, she didn't understand They were just all told to go. She is actually suffering tremendously right now emotionally. And yet, despite all that, she said, Mommy, I'm going back next year.
How old is she?
She's 28, right, sweetie? 28.
Yeah.
Oh, is this your daughter that's in college in New York?
No, this is the one who lives in Israel.
Oh, okay.
She's married. She lives in Israel.
So, Rabbi Khan, you want to explain what the importance is of that area? Go ahead, Joel. Joel has a comment.
My background is one of the holidays at the wall. I don't know which one it is, but those are all people. So you can imagine.
Yeah.
Oh, the picture, you mean the picture behind you, Joel?
Yes, I'm not sure what holiday it is, but it's being celebrated at the wall of the temple. And look at the people.
Thousands and thousands and thousands.
I mean, they're elbow to elbow. So you can understand that they're not thinking with their cup. They're thinking with something else, because this could be a disaster if somebody yelled fire. I mean, it's like yelling fire in a movie theater.
Yeah.
So I thought that picture was timely.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Why don't we let Harris comment? Harris, did you
want to comment? This whole thing happened because somebody tripped. It doesn't make sense to me. Somebody tripped and they all went Meshiga.
They're not even sure if that's the reason.
Well, like Sarah Beth said, it could have appeared to them that there was somebody got killed, there was a terrorist act. You know, if you're living in Israel, you're thinking maybe there's a terrorist, and so people probably started running downstairs, just trying to get the heck out of there as soon as they could, and didn't know what was going on. But that's why when you have that many people, it's a scary feeling also when you're just that crowded and there's that many people around, you don't know what's happening. People panic, and they must have panicked and just started running out in large numbers.
I think going forward, they won't allow that anymore.
Maybe not. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Maybe they'll do those by Zoom now. Anyway, Rabbi Khan, tell everybody what's going on in
Sure. So
area.
there's two different kind of pieces of information that can help people understand why everyone was there and why there were 100,000 people. And usually in other years, there have been even more. The first part of the picture is to understand that between the holiday of Passover and between the holiday of Shavuot is a period called the omer. And there's a actual mitzvah, an actual command in the Torah to count each day leading up to Shavuot from the holiday of Passover, from the second day of the holiday of Passover, as we kind of anticipate celebrating the holiday of Shavuot. And that period is called the omer. The 33rd day of that period, which in Hebrew is Lamed Gimel, which we pronounce as Lag, is called Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. And on that day, all over Israel, not just in Meron where this terrible tragedy happened, but all over Israel and in many places in the and around the world, Jews celebrated as a minor festival. And there's a custom to light bonfires at night and to have singing and dancing and to have weddings specifically on that day. A lot of weddings take place on the day of Lag BaOmer. So that takes place all over the place. And Israel, you really...
Because that day is associated with a plague that was going on with Rabbi Akiva and his academy, and allegedly on the 33rd day, the plague broke.
Very good.
And so they celebrate Lag BaOmer every day for that. And also is the birthday of one of his disciples, a great founder really of Talmudic Judaism, Shimon bar Yochai, who is also, I believe he was, I think that's when he died.
That was
the day. He died, and he said, "On the day that I die, I don't want lamenting. I want a celebration. I want to celebrate my life on that day." Is that right?
Yes, and his tomb is in the spot called Meron, the town of Meron in Israel, and that is where the tragedy happened, because it's been the custom for many, many, many years for Jews to come all over Israel to that spot where Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is buried, and to come there and say special prayers, to come there and have celebrations and singing and dancing, and that's become a very, very popular place for Jews from all over the country to come, and that's why when you look at pictures of it, and Joel, I'm glad you put up that picture, but that's really what it looks like. The picture you see behind Joel is what things look like. That's of the Kotel in Jerusalem, but if you look at pictures of Meron from above, you just see people, hundreds of thousands of people coming to this spot to celebrate, sing, pray. And it's always been an incredibly joyous, action-packed kind of excitement, a kind of experience, festive experience that was turned to terrible mourning and tragedy this year because of what happened. But that's why they were coming to that particular spot. As the rabbi said, this great rabbi who lived about 2,000 years ago is buried there. And the particular day called Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, is the day of his, is the Yortzeit, the anniversary of his death.
Yeah. Anything else anyone would like to share? Sid, did you want to speak? You're on mute. You're muted.
Oh yes. So what I was going to say is that the passages to the place where this is celebrated are very narrow, and because it was hard for people to get out, that's why people died.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I just want to mention again how unusual it is to have an Orthodox rabbi, a non-Orthodox rabbi sharing thoughts together. And I think it's really, really important for the Jewish people that we unite and join forces and consider ourselves one. We're very small in number. We got an important job to do. There's not many of us doing it. And we all need to work together on it. So this is a very good experience. Before this, we had a meeting about marketing at L'Dor Va-Dor, because we're thinking like we're doing something that's really important. And we appreciate all the people that are watching, but I think a lot more people would be interested in watching if they knew what was going on and that this type of thing existed. So we're going to try to get the word out and spread the word. So Sarah Beth, it's great to see you here. I'm glad you were able to get off from tutoring. We love having dialogue with Zvi. He's just such a wonderful person. And I know a lot of rabbis because I'm a rabbi. My dad was a rabbi. I've seen a lot of rabbis around. And to a lot of them, it's just a job. You know, it's like, well, I'm not going to do a dialogue. I'm too busy. Rabbi Khan is a blessing and a breath of fresh air. He's a very, very open and loving and very great expositor of Orthodox Judaism. And best of all, he puts up with some of my pointed questions. He's dealing with a rabbi and a lawyer at the same time. So I asked some questions that are a little disconcerting. But one time I was really happy. There was one session that we had where he asked me a couple of tough questions and said, well, wait a minute, Rabbi, what you're saying, I don't quite agree with. And he put me on the spot. And I really like that. That was our best session yet. So I'm still open to that, but it's really great having you and your wife. And we've seen your kids sometimes too. So I want to thank everybody for being part of this discussion. And we'll be doing a lot more in the future. And hopefully we'll be marketing it so a lot of other people can hear. Thanks, everybody.